Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to tonight's evening lecture by Rita Segato. We are a little late because we couldn't stop discussing this afternoon section, so we are in ongoing discussion since this morning. So you see it's a very lively conference. I'm very happy that it is this way. Nevertheless, let me welcome you for tonight's lecture by Rita Segato, and let me particularly warmly welcome Professor Segato herself, who is in the midst of the mountains, the Anden, I don't know in English, and has a little bit unstable connection. So in case she loses her connection, we just have to be patient. She'll be back and continue her presentation. So Rita, I'm very glad to have you with us in this conference. Very warm welcome to you. Let me briefly introduce Professor Segato to you. Rita Laura Segato is Professor Emeritus of the University of Brasilia, where she taught in the Department of Anthropology and in the graduate programs of Bioethics and Human Rights. In 2018, the Reina Sofia Museum in Madrid created the Aníbal Quijano Chair and appointed her as its holder. In 2019, I like this particularly, the Universidad Nacional de San Martín in Argentina established the Rita Segato Chair of Inconvenient Thought under her leadership. Segato also participates in the coordination of the Afro-Latin American and Caribbean Studies specialization course of the Latin American Council of Social Sciences. And in 2022, she will be a visiting professor in the Latin American Studies program at Princeton University in the US. Throughout her career, Rita Segato has been a visiting scholar at numerous institutions and taught graduate seminars at various international universities. She has received 5 honorary doctorates and numerous awards, including the Frantz Fanon Award of the Caribbean Association of Philosophy for Lifetime Achievement just this year. She did extensive work in the field of human rights. Among others, she collaborated with the National Foundation of the Indio in Brazil and with various women's organizations in Mexico, El Salvador, Guatemala, Nicaragua, and Honduras. Since 2013, she has worked as an expert witness in various courts. Rita Segato published many books, amongst them translated to German, Las Estructuras Elementales de la Violencia, Wieder die Grausamkeit, from 2003, German 2021, so just published, and then 2007, La Nación y sus otros, and 2016, La Guerra contra las Mujeres. Rita Segato, thank you very much. The title of your lecture is Being Rooted in a Particular Nature, Refuting Equivalence. It's your floor now. Welcome.
Hello, everyone, and I'll read a short text that I translated it into English for the sake of this conference. From the rooted subject to the universal subject, in search of the return journey to an ethics of the non-standardized. I will narrate a process that occurs in a world in which I currently reside in the Andean northwest of my country, Argentina. My argument has important precedents in other authors like Borges, Polanyi, and Escobar, Arturo Escobar, which are the ones that I mentioned in the text. but its originality lies in the fact that my starting point is the description of precise facts that have been related to me, told to me, events that take place in the geography and environment that I know since I was very young and now I inhabit. This is the first text of a series, the tip of the thread of an argumentative path that will develop the difference between rootedness and homologation, convertibility and commutability, consistent logic and paraconsistent logic, cumulative logic, and additive logic. A very concrete ethnographic example taken from an old text of mine, published lately in 2007 in my book, The Nation and Its Others, that provides access to what I want to expose and examine here. Pachamama is the name of the earth for the average inhabitant of the Andean region of Jujuy, the place where I am now. And to honor her fertility, people pay homage to her by feeding her, giving her a portion of all food and drink before they eat and drink in festivities. Giving food to the earth is how this gesture, so common in the region, is described. There are also privileged places for dialogue with the earth, wells, waterfalls, mountains, as well as particular times marked in the annual cycle for contact. The landscape where the shepherd families are settled and the expanses through which they travel with their herds are marked with mojones, stone altars marking points of contact with the Pachamama. These mounds are regularly increased in size with new stones deposited during prescribed occasions in the annual calendar, such as the señalada or marking of the herd, carnival, or processions on saints' feast days. It follows that this is not the case of a simple interrelation of the agricultural cycle and the ritual cycle, but that they are one and the same in the indissoluble reality in the eyes of the inhabitants of the region. This makes it impossible to speak of productive activity as a concept separate from worship activity. The relationship to the cosmos and the relationship to useful space terms that our Western cognitive and linguistic habits distinguish constitute one and the same inseparable reality. A mountain is the physical aspect of a transcendental subjectivity with which it is possible to communicate through topographically idiosyncratic points. It is unique, endowed with different signifying attributes, animated, and through these points, it dialogues with its inhabitants. It is through them, these stone mounds, that they offer water. It is through these places, natural places, it is through them that it offers waters, pastures, passages, and it is also through them that it receives care and offerings. So there is an interchange between people and what we call nature, an exchange of things. During festivals such as the Señalada or branding of llama cattle, the point of cosmic contact is marked by a pile of stones called mojon, and it is at this single distinct point that the earth is fed. There, around it, ritual offerings are deposited. During Carnival, another heap of stones marks the place where the devil departs from and returns to and is buried when the festival of Carnival is over. Other points of contact can be found on the trails that lead to the abras or mountain passages. The apachetas, stone mounds that are built along the pilgrimage routes and as second points in the mountains and springs, and the mojones, stone mounds on the land of the families, their herdyards and boundaries are points marked by local history through which the connection with the Pachamama cosmos is activated. It is through this point of contact that the hills and the land receive the chaya. It is through them that they are fed. Thus, the immense mountainous regions, monotonous and inexpressive to outsiders, becomes a text where human transits have inscribed and continue to inscribe their signs over a long period of time. Such demarcations testify to the persistence of a conception of inhabited space that is both immanent and transcendent. Also, the sense of community and the values and routines of reciprocity that govern human interaction correlate with the values and routines of reciprocity that govern the relationship with the land. Human relations are here only one aspect of relations with the cosmos and with the habitat. Only a proper understanding of this pattern of relationships between mountain people and their physical environment makes it possible to assess the exact dimension of the change introduced by the arrival of evangelical cults on the scene. Most significantly, the first thing that is done when a family converts is to demolish the cairns or the mounds of stones that demarcate the space occupied by the family that is converting to the new creed. This demolition is done with the help of a truck or other heavy vehicle. With this ritual leveling gesture, the key that regulated the old relationship with the natural space is destroyed, and the old relationship between the inhabitants and the physical space is abolished. The human inscriptions that had made each point and piece of land inalienably singular are suppressed. Land changes its role and meaning. Rootedness disappears, and the instrumental approach to the environment is imposed. As a consequence of the religion conversion, the landscape undergoes a profound transformation. The inhabitant of the Puna, which is the name given to the Altiplano in Argentina, begins to look at his horizon in the same way as he would look at any other horizon. Only the particular exploitation techniques are specific to it and remain part of its idiosyncrasy. The inhabited space is no longer a text that speaks about the long term presence of a people. It no longer speaks about a community and its way of life. Space is transformed into a mere resource for exploitation. I often, I often asked evangelicals in the different villages where I worked how they can continue to practice señalada, which is the marking of the herd, without nourishing the land. The answer was always the same. Señalada became a mere rural pastoral task, barely necessary to recognize the flock. That is, the land and the animals cease to be manifestation of a living, common, shared spirit that runs through them and are transformed into things, exploitable and quantifiable resources. A mystique of the land and its utilities mediated by an obligation of reciprocity between humans and non-humans disappears. This process can be well described in Weber's in, sorry, in Weber's terms, as a typical passage into modernity and the progressive disenchantment of the world that follows. The relationship with nature is no longer one of communication and mutuality, for it becomes one of subject object governed by instrumental reason. The environment is objectified and transformed into something external and opposed to the consciousness of its inhabitants. Everything that was qualitative and alive becomes quantitative and reified. The relationship with bodies is also altered, and the Cartesian res extensa is imposed, and with it, the pornographic gaze from the eye to the thing, inherent to the subjectivity organized by the pattern of coloniality. Along this path, life is a thing, as life as a thing becomes a thing commodity. Land is no longer conceived of an oikonomia, but as an economy. There, the introduction of notions such as land measurement interferes with the previous spatial organization and introduces the concept of land as something divisible and alienable. The land life becomes the land thing, measurable and referable to a grid or universal equivalent necessary for the attribution of exchange value, surface area, presence of springs and rivers, distance of roads for the transit of marketable products become part of the calculation of the price of the property. We thus enter a type of commensurability different from that which is part of the obligation of mutuality and reciprocity in the communal environment. Commensurability, previously directed towards the objective of commuting inherent in economic barter, embedded, as Karl Polanyi so well defined in his work, The Great Transformation, which I call rooted in the community, lodged in a landscape, in a land among land people, umbilically connected in a cosmos rather than in a territory, that is to say, with a non-convertible territoriality, all of that will henceforth be oriented by the calculation of conversion. Convertibility based on a universal monetary referent and commutability on the ground based on concrete everyday needs are opposing operations. This mutation is operated by means of celebrating religious conversion that demands the erasure of the marks of contact with the Pachamama cosmos. All those stone mounds are destroyed. So there are no places irreducible, and there are not those places where the umbilical cord with the cosmos is made alive, is acceded. There is access to it. A religious gesture is transformed into an economic political gesture. For this reason, we can even dare to affirm that reciprocity is the missing slogan in the proclamation of the French Revolution, which would mark a fundamental difference with the other three, because liberty, equality, and fraternity are mandates emanating from the position of a third party situated on the platform of the universal subject who enunciates a general and abstract law. Reciprocity is inevitably rooted in the sense of situated and resulting from its embedding in a country or landscape irreducible to homologation, homogenization, and flattening of a territorialized nature. Reciprocity takes place on the stage of local and regional markets, of the genetic plurality of species, and of the great variety of people's historical projects. Liberty, equality, and fraternity homogenize and homologize. They are from a world of convertibility in the landscape of an abstracted nature. Reciprocity links, binds, and is from the world of commutability of positions and possessions in the landscape of a concrete and vital nature. Only reciprocity and the principle of commutability can guarantee a radically and irreducibly plural world, where what exists is not homologable in the sense that is not commensurable or comparable by means of homologation referred to a grid of the universal ultimately monetary equivalent. Non-homologable means that it does not find possible equivalence by means of a universal referent, and this in turn means that we are not in the habitat of the nature thing of life reified and transformed into merchandise. We are in the dimension of the pluriverse, as defined by Arturo Escobar. We are also in the atmosphere of the classification of animals of a certain Chinese encyclopedia, of which Borges speaks, and in which Michel Foucault finds his point of departure for writing his Palabras y las Cosas. But here Borges' classification becomes a desideratum and a point of arrival, and no longer within the framework of designation and linguistics, but within the framework of economics and politics. According to his classification, to this classification, Chinese, which is a fiction, which Borges tells in his text, the analytical language of Wilkins, animals are divided into belonging to their emperor, embalmed, tame, suckling pigs, sirens, fabulous, stray dogs, included in this present classification, transient, innumerable, drawn with a very fine camel hair brush, etc., having just broken the water pitcher that from a long way off look like flies. He's saying to us, Borges, with his fiction of a classification of a Chinese encyclopedia, that we should realize that it is impossible to abstract life. On this economic principle can give, only this economic principle can give rise to an effectively democratic world, because a democracy that does not have pluralism as its ultimate goal and supreme value inevitably becomes a dictatorship of the majority. And the various forms of fascism having nothing other than dictatorships of majorities. I do not want to forget mentioning here that in other communally structured peoples, other practices have a function equivalent to that of the stone markers in the Andean north of Argentina. Other practices that indicate the irreducibility of the inhabited space, the impossibility of applying the rules of convertibility mediated by the universal monetary reference, and determine the rootedness of its inhabitants. Something as widespread throughout the peasant and indigenous world of my continent, of this continent, as the burial of the navel in the birth of place, in the place of birth. Or the gesture I observed in the houses of African religion in Brazil, where when the saint comes down, when the faithful enters a state of possession by an orisha, the first thing that happens is that his or her foot expels the sandal and touches the ground, because with the presence of the divinity in the body, the earth is transmuted, effectively transubstantiated into African soil. This operation introduces a greater degree of complexity, where the community celebrates its ritual, the foot of the divinity that arrives, marks the ground, and transmutes it, transubstantiates it into the ground of rootedness that slavery has not managed to cancel. A religious gesture that is political, a gesture of re-existence, which cancels the possibility of the homologation of inhabited space and the reification of nature. For political philosophers in general, with history conceived in an evolutionary way, oikonomia, oikonomia becomes the state, understood here as the administrative apparatus of a larger domestic economy. In his disappointed work, Power and Glory, Giorgio Agamben, I consider that Agamben's book as disappointing, really. Agamben speaks of the transition from oikonomia to political economy. In this transition to political economy, the government is concerned with the expansion of what was previously entrenched economy. The nation would then be public economy in the sense of an expanded domestic economy. From the story I shared with you, it is possible to understand that to consider this a transit as a simple evolution is an unforgivable mistake. It is not a transit, but the hijacking of a way of being in nature, a way of being in nature, an economic perspective of a rooted communal type in which domestic management has not been expropriated of its politicity for its transmutation into a political bureaucratic state monetary perspective, a rooted subject that manages to a concrete and non-homologable standardized territory is held by a stick wielded from a universal subject that administers an abstract territory. It is necessary not to be seduced by the scheme that defines as a transition the mutation from oikonomia to political economy, because when seen from our landscapes, it is not about the transition from an administration of the immediate, inherent space in the sense of domestic property to the administration of a political public space, but of two incommensurable ways of being in the world and of thinking the world without possible transitivity, each one with its own conception of what nature is. It is not transition, but the effect of a process of constant colonization based on conditions given by a previous situation of historical oppression guaranteed by the conquest. Coloniality in permanent expansion of its borders and deepening of its impositions. It is the effect of a power relationship and should definitely not be described as an evolution of the mode of management. This transmutation from one economy to another, from one management to another, from one nature to another, will have consequence for women's lives and will exacerbate the patriarchal order. But that is the subject of other texts. So I finished here, and so I am open. I hope you understood. I have a very accent reading in English, but I hope you can follow me by reading the text.